In narrative medicine, it's really about learning to be uncomfortable with the emptiness and with the not knowing, and to sit with that as long as it takes to hear the authentic news that the person in front of you is trying to convey.
Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education Podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. I'm so excited to welcome today Dr. Rondalyn Whitney, who is a mental health occupational therapist, writer, and narrative medicine practitioner whose journey shifts the conversation on grief, trauma, and family healing. And after losing her husband in an automobile accident, she became a solo parent and confronted the reality that mourning is an occupation and one that our systems also rarely tend to support. Her work is now rooted in helping other widows navigate grief, teaching clinicians and families how to tell their own stories, and making sure that intervention is both timely and usable. With more than 20 years of focus on childhood development, autism, and trauma-informed care, Rondalyn moves fluency between theory and lived experience, believing that healing is an ongoing process that involves turning pain into purpose, finding meaning, and learning to listen beyond the immediate loss. She's on a mission to bring compassionate, trauma-aware practices into classrooms and homes. All right, so before I proceed with the segment, I just wanted to say that this was such an incredible conversation. Rondalyn reached out to me after hearing my conversation with Ron Yap, a prior guest who talks about the inner hero journey. And I was so excited because I had never had a narrative medicine practitioner on this segment. And for those tuning in, you're going to learn all about how narrative medicine is an approach, it's a practice, and it's also a bit of a mindset as to how writing, witnessing, and listening can all be used within classrooms. I was so excited to meet with Rondalyn that we just jumped feet first into our conversation and we took it right from there. So instead of a question answer, which we've seen in previous segments before, I just want to let you know that this is going to be our raw, mostly unfiltered conversation, which I thought was such a gift to hold. And what you'll be hearing during our conversation is what narrative medicine is and what draws clinicians and storytellers to this work. We're going to hear about some of Rondalyn's grief journey, where she speaks very openly about losing her husband to an automobile accident and using the act of writing, as she coins it, for the first 366 days to keep herself alive. And we're also going to hear about how narrative medicine and how writing and how storytelling changes the ways we see ourselves in stories that we weren't expecting to see ourselves in. Rondalyn was also an occupational therapist, so she'll talk about her time in that role and what she's done at the leadership level in universities in her position there. And we'll also hear about how families, communities, and classroom navigating spaces of grief can use this practice of narrative medicine, can help people feel and witness stories while changing the definition as to what responsibility with responding actually looks like from the side of the practitioner. And we'll also hear about how classrooms, for example, are using narrative medicine to help bring the stories out of our students, but how it can also change the definition of responding in a way that is still upheld as one that is responsible. Okay, let's go ahead and start the conversation. Rondalyn, great to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Joey. I'm really looking forward to talking to you.
I'm honored. Thank you again for the opportunity. You are such a special guest to me because I cannot tell you how long and hard I have tried to look for somebody who practices narrative medicine for this program. And my experience, tell me where you're calling from today, remind me.
Oh, I'm in Western Massachusetts.
Okay. So I'm in South Florida, and where I am in South Florida is Parkland. And
Okay.
this is the region where in 2018 that there was a mass shooting at our local high school, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. And that was my alma mater. And I was a present substitute teacher right next door at their feeder middle school that day. So I'm somebody who experienced the whole lockdown. There were students that were freshmen who were killed right next door that I had known by being in their middle school classrooms the year before. And I always forget about this. I was actually one of the first substitute teachers to be let back into the school when the school was having their reopening. So it was just such a profound experience being in the city during that time as a community member and somebody working in the schools. And my first year of teaching was back at that school, at that middle school that fall. And just working there and then later throughout the district, it was such a deeply profound experience working in the aftermath of trauma. Because at the same time, we had the community trauma, and I had 3 months later lost a very good friend to suicide. And I started to engulf this non negotiable, as I call it, where I said I had the non negotiable deed to keep my students alive, both physically and mentally, by all means necessary. And what that did for me is that by being the composition teacher, I'm the writing teacher, I was using my classroom as a space for middle school students to use narrative medicine, to bleed their pain, show me their darkness, bring everything into the center of the room. And long story short, I didn't last because it wasn't seen as being standard aligned, where they were supposed to just be on iReady, focusing on hitting these benchmarks. And when I would say to admin, are you aware that the student feels suicidal, feels this, and this? Because when we are looking at stories like of mice and
Right.
men, and we talk about themes like loneliness and trauma, and students share that with me, the response from admin was not, oh, thanks for helping us out. You're a new teacher and we love that you're trying these skills. It was more like, you're a first year teacher. What are you doing? And why are they telling you things that we're not ready to hear? So that's how narrative medicine became something so powerful to me, because what I'm doing now is that I'm actually doing my first book on thinking about how to create a classroom that balances this ecosystem of emotions and academics at the same time, where the classroom can feel therapeutic or feel good for students, but never feel therapy to students, where emotions dominate the center. And I'm learning as to how narrative medicine can play a role in that.
That's great. Well, if I may comment on that, as a former professor, I think you have the finger on the pulse of what we actually need.
Mhm.
So thank you for that. There are increasing opportunities and recognition of the importance of what you're talking about, certainly in the university setting. Narrative medicine started in New York from Columbia. And
Oh,
we'll
wow.
talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but
Yeah.
I want to stay to your story for a little bit, if I may.
Mhm.
When all of this happened to me, my husband passed
Yes.
because the Cosmic Joker has a great time with us mortals. About a week after my husband passed, I got an announcement that I had received a grant from SAMHSA. SAMHSA, yeah,
Yeah. 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 Mhm.
and awful timing. The point of me bringing that into this conversation, though, was I had submitted a grant to create education for occupational therapy program, not just our school, but all programs, to teach about substance use and addiction in the classroom. And in the call for the grant, it said, if you can somehow, whoever gets this grant, if you can somehow reduce stigma and othering, that would be great. And it specifically said in the call for grants, but we don't expect that, so we don't score for it. But narrative medicine at the root is for and in behalf of social justice, that we learn to listen deeply to another person's story, not to be therapeutic, but because if we are heard and if we are seen, it is healing. So, narrative medicine does not promise to provide healing because it's not a therapeutic approach,
Yes. Yeah.
but people often feel better, is the way they say it.
Absolutely.
And it's exactly what you just said.
Mhm.
And as we talk more today, we can talk about bringing things to the page. But I will also tell you on a monthly basis, Columbia Narrative Medicine, usually twice a month, has a free online workshop that you can attend and you can experience a narrative medicine session. It's about an hour long for free by the instructors of narrative medicine.
I've recently been collaborating with my recent podcast guest, Dr. Adam Wolfsdorf. He wrote the text Navigating Trauma in the English Classroom. He's been in my podcast 3 times.
So
And
cool.
in our first segment that we did, he says exactly that. He says, I cannot walk into an English classroom and say, my work will heal you. Oh, we're going to talk about Of Mice and Men or The Giver. Yeah, there's trauma in everything. Even The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. There is
Right.
trauma in every story. And
Everything, right.
if we miss the trauma, the story is now incomplete. We
Right.
cannot walk into class and say to our students, I will heal you through this story. That's just a bad promise to make. But we can certainly say, through the use of stories, we can help you think differently and feel better about how the way you may be approaching your thoughts. That's something that we can guarantee, that our stories can change their thinking. And when you were teaching,
Right.
what was your subject? Were you writing?
I was an occupational therapist, so my subjects were within the occupational therapy curriculum. The last place I taught was I was the chair of the program at Quinnipiac University in
Oh,
Hamden,
wow.
Connecticut. And before that, I was at West Virginia University. That's where I
Oh,
was when the accident happened.
I see.
So I taught at the school medicine. That's where the OT program is housed in the school
Mhm.
medicine. There's a wonderful woman at WVU that I had the absolute privilege to get to know. Her name is Renee Nicholson. And it was funny because I was thinking of her today before coming on to talk with you, and now I understand why she was so on my mind. Renee is also a graduate. She has a certificate in narrative medicine, as I do. She was, I don't know, a year or semester ahead of me. And she and I got to do some work together in collecting health narratives and then evaluating them. I was looking at encoding it for themes of occupation. She collected the health narratives from people in the cancer unit receiving chemo. And one of the things that we found in doing that was, no surprise, people talked about what was meaningful and important to them. That's what an occupation is, the things that are bring meaning and purpose to your life, the day-to-day things that you do that makes you who you are, creates your identity. If something happens and you can't do them, you have this true sense of grief and loss, whatever it is. You know, you can't bake anymore if you've been a baker. You can't drive anymore if you become an elder person who can't drive anymore. So those occupations, right? When they go away, they really hurt us because they're a piece of us, right? Anyway,
Mhm.
so as people were receiving their treatments and Renee was collecting their stories, one man in particular, these are people in Appalachia, and he talked about how much he loved being at the farm in the summer and driving his tractor and fishing in his lake and having the family come over and picnic on the huge country lawn, and all of the things he loved to do in his day-to-day, everyday life. And Renee showed that to the palliative care oncologist. And the palliative care oncologist really got tearful. And he said, I was just getting ready to prescribe another 6 months of chemo for this man.
Mm.
And it would have maybe given him a few more days, but I would have robbed him of that life.
Yeah.
So instead, he went to the man and said, coming here, taking your days, to travel to the hospital and travel back and having the fatigue and all that went with the treatment will prevent you from having the things that are beloved, your beloved occupations with your family. So I'm going to discharge you to your life. And it just transformed this physician's care. And that was the power that, Renee and maybe I had using narrative medicine as an approach in healthcare. One of the things I learned and talk about in my book, Habits of Widows, I wrote every day for a year and a day because they say you have to live every day for a year and a day. I love what you said about your job was to keep the kids alive. And, I
Yeah.
really felt like, you know, becoming a widow is one of the highest health risks of anything else that happens to us, losing an intimate partner. And I had a teenager, and I knew I had to not be that statistic. I had to figure this out. And so I had heard this idea that one had to live a year and a day. Of course, that's a lie. So my second book is all the lies they tell you, all the lies in the afterlife. But anyway, I held on to that, writing for a year and a day in order to survive. And, this idea of listening, witnessing, listening with intention, I think that's one of the powers of writing is the page
Mhm.
as a witness. And
Yes.
sometimes we have things to say that people really can't hear. It's unkind. It's like an emotional vomit. And many people are not up to receiving it. They're just not. That's why it's so powerful if somebody does sit and listen, because it's so rare. And narrative medicine helps people practice. That's why they call it a practitioner. It helps people practice listening and not listening to our own thoughts, but being willing to step into and tolerate the emptiness we find when we don't have I know the answer, I know what to fix, I know I'm listening to how to fix this. You just tell me and I'll fix it. I'm a physician, I'm a therapist, I'm listening for how to fix it. I know the diagnosis, here's your pill, bye. Like I know how to fix it. We do that in all kinds of relationships, right?
Right.
We're listening to our internal voice of what's the fix here. But in narrative medicine, it's really about learning to be uncomfortable with the emptiness and with the not knowing, and to sit with that as long as it takes to hear the authentic news that the person in front of you is trying to convey. And so, writing in a journal, if we allow it, and that's what I did for a year and a day, between me and the page was the only one that could listen to me. It's not that I don't have friends, I have a ton of friends. I have a great family. I have people who want to listen and want to see. But the experience of grief is so heavy. It's a caregiver burden. It burdens people. And they want to say things like, aren't you over it yet? Because really what they're saying is, I can't stand to hear this anymore. This is too hard for me. I can't fix it. And of course, those of us that are grieving, we don't need them to fix it. We just need to be heard. And the only way they could fix it is to bring the person back. Well, of course, no one can do that. So again, back to the beauty of narrative medicine helps us grow muscle, if you will, or grow tolerance, or grow the habit of listening, right? Authentically listening so that you can see, you can hear, you can feel what's trying to be conveyed. You sort of think about, okay, where is this person right now? When is this happening? What is in the shadow of the room? Like when you went back into the classroom after a couple weeks, the shadow was the trauma and the grief.
Yeah.
That you're teaching in the shadow of that. Of course, in English, we talk a lot about writing in the shadow of whatever's going
Yep.
on in the world, right?
Yep.
And so we listen in the shadow, and knowing that is really important. But I think it takes a special kind of, I guess, it's courage or practice to be able to sit with that discomfort, because it's not comfortable to sit with that not knowing. It's not comfortable to sit with the emptiness. When I went to the page and wrote, it wasn't comfortable. I never knew what was going to come out. Sometimes a poem would come out. Sometimes a song I would listen to. Sometimes a memory would come out. Sometimes something my son said would come out. Sometimes how horrible the day was would come out. Sometimes how beautiful the day was would come out. And when you're in the grieving space, if you have a horrible day, people say you should cheer up. If you have a beautiful day, people say, didn't you love him? Why are you laughing? Right? Like there's no win in the grief space, right? There's always somebody that's got their own internal model that they want to put on you. And they don't mean, I really can only think of a couple people in the world that I would say are just absolute bad humans and malicious, but that's rare. For the most part, people want to be kind and want to be caring, but they're so clueless in the grief space and in the trauma space. They just don't know how. And I think it's deeply unfortunate. And back to your earlier point, Joey, I think all the work that people do about listening, writing, being willing to sit in this, witnessing, all of that is moving the needle, if you will, of our humanity into a place where we can actually be better human beings to each other. I think we all will do better if we know how, but how do we teach people? And I know I'm biased, but one of the biases I have is I think many of the answers to the how do we be a better human being are in literature. They're in art.
That's my answer too. Yep.
Yeah, and they're buried and they're ancient. Like you can go back 200 years and find an answer that's still relevant today, right? You can go into a song and find an answer. You can go into a movie and find an answer. They're hidden and buried everywhere for us to uncover at just the right moment and uncover over and over and over again. But When we undervalue that, we don't teach that, we don't help students learn how to deeply read something, then they can't learn how to deeply listen to people, and they don't know how to listen deeply to themselves. I'd like to share a story of my son after my husband died. Of course, it was a nightmare, right? Like, my husband's a great guy. He was a real loss of a husband and a friend and a dad. And so, understandably, my son had some struggles with school. And my son's a smarty pants, right? Like, he could do nothing and ace a test, but he was doing less than nothing. And, his life was hard. And he is both a scientist and an artist. He's that rare person. Like, he won the governor's school for the arts in West Virginia. They give it to 10 kids a year. I mean, he's a unique dude. So anyway, so halfway through the semester, I get a note from his online art teacher. Everyone's online, that he's flunking art class. I'm like, wait, what? My son, he loves art. He's always doing stuff around the house. He's like, had a pottery wheel, and he like, this didn't make any sense to me. So I reached out to this teacher, and she asked me about it, and I told her a story, and she's like, oh, okay, this is making a little more sense now. And I said, it's really surprising to me that he's failing art, because he's literally out on the back deck right now. And we had two Adirondack chairs that Dad and I always sat in. My son was literally out there painting the Adirondack chairs into a galaxy. My husband was a physicist. He loved stars, like he was that guy. And my son was transforming these chairs into two galaxies. So they're navy blue now, and they've got planets and constellations and all these things. And he'd created this, like, you take a coffee can and you cut the top and the bottom off and you put it on the paint, and then you light it on fire. So the fire goes down into the can, it bubbles up the paint, then you take it off, and the round circle under it looks like a planet that's bubbly and uneven. So, like, that's what he was doing as I was talking to this teacher, who said he's flunking art because he's not doing any of the art. So I said to her, wow, this is what he's doing. She goes, this lovely teacher who I'd never met in person, but she said to me, you know, art is supposed to be healing during times of trauma. And I would say that what your son is doing is exactly what I'm trying to teach the other students, many of whom are not getting it. But he's living it. Send me a picture of those chairs, and I will give him full credit. And she did. It was a beautiful, like, that woman got it. I would say that teacher and a few like them who really got it made the difference, certainly with my son during grief, that you're talking about.
I was thinking about Brene Brown, and Brene Brown
Yes,
said in one of her recent podcasts as well, she said that she acts as that witness when she journals for herself, where that blank page is really that one space where she can be unfiltered in the way that she doesn't feel judged or needing to feel validation. And she says that, sometimes she'll bring that journal into her therapists and she'll read it out loud, and it just feels like such an out-of-body experience for her. But
sure.
when I teach Literature 101, I do it in the way that makes students become a witness to characters in a story. And the difference there is that when I was teaching middle school, they just had to look for theme and plot and vocabulary. And I couldn't put language to it at the time, but I realized once I started teaching college, I'm like, yes, that misses the boat. And while those are all important factors for learning development, if we only teach to those standards and those factors, then we've missed the boat. Because if we
Right,
don't teach students emotions and empathy,
right.
and part of the first book that I'm writing now, like I'm writing my own book on teaching practices, I'm balancing that emotion with academics in the classroom. When it comes to literature, like I can teach Laurie's The Giver. Do you know The Giver? It's one of my favorite stories. I can teach The Giver and I can talk about Jonas, but then I can also deflect the question and having students be that witness where I say, why would somebody like the elders choose to make a community that's different than ours? And why would Jonas want to be that person to take on the pain for his community, hold on to the painful memories, and become the person to witness that for others? And why is pain important? And we could have a really personal discussion about that, where maybe even students share their most painful memory and how that's impacted their practice. But then that question dials back where I say, okay, now that you understand that value of pain, What did Jonas do with it? What are we witnessing this fictional literary character actually doing with it? And then we allow students to become that witness to something in fiction to build a toolkit for their own behavior.
Yeah, it's so powerful. It really is. And my education in literature was really all about coming up with the right answer of what's the theme.
Exactly. Yep.
There's three wrong answers and one correct answer.
Yeah, exactly.
And on, right? Not helpful.
I always tell my students there is no right or wrong answer. Contrary to what you might think, yes, we'll reference back to the text for supporting ourselves, but there is no right or wrong answer. There are only interpretive answers. And when you
Right.
interpret those responses, you will share what is either more valid or less valid. And whichever way you're swinging, I will say to you, tell me more about your answer. And that could
Right.
be either to have you think differently about what's less valid or really emphasize what is more valid that we want to know more about.
When I was taking my classes in narrative medicine with the instructor and we had assignments and so on, we had a cohort, of course. And our classroom conversations were very much like what you and I are having today. And you just got all
Mhm.
excited and charged and like, you should talk to this. And have you ever read that? And, that kind of stuff. But Rita Sharon, who is considered the founder of narrative medicine, studied literature as an undergrad, much to her parents' concern. And then she became very interested in social justice and spent some time in her young adulthood on causes related to social justice. Then she went back to school and did get her MD, which made her parents very happy, and eventually became an instructor of new physicians. And she tried very hard to teach the new physicians how to listen better to their patients. And as she says, they just failed miserably over and over. They just couldn't get it. Maybe they didn't want to get it, but she was very frustrated. And she went back into her training and she said, when I was studying literature, we were taught how to deeply read a text, which is what you're talking about, like what's,
Mhm.
in between the words, not the right answer, but what you bring to it, what you gather from it, what you're taking away from it, to deeply read the text. And she said, I wondered if I taught the physicians to deeply read a text, might that transfer into the patient provider encounter? And so she set about testing that theory,
Mhm.
which has now become the practice of narrative medicine because it does, in fact, transfer in wonderful and profound ways. And if we don't teach students to deeply read texts, pieces of art, poetry, literature, music, film, how would they ever have an opportunity to deeply read the text of a child who shows up in a classroom with, say, trauma or autism or fill in any blank? That the child is experiencing something that they need to be heard, they need to be seen, they need somebody to feel with them, help them learn to feel. We don't have a shot at it if we don't have that somewhere in our training, in our consciousness, in our development as human beings.
So, when it comes to classrooms, when we think of narrative medicine, I think a lot of educators feel very anxious at hearing the word medicine. Like, again, sometimes medicine equates to feeling like you're going to heal somebody. And like we mentioned earlier, we are not practitioners of healing, but sometimes that message gets lost when we go into a classroom with these types of practices. So then when we talk about the way that narrative medicine can be implemented into classrooms, how can that be done in a way that doesn't make educators feel intimidated by learning about the practice?
My first thought, and then I'll get to your actual question, is we have to stop for a minute and really think about what is medicine. I like words. I think you like words.
Yes.
There are a lot of words that have gotten squished down to be so small, they really don't mean what they were meant to mean. So, caring, for example, is one. You talk about caregivers and the burden of caregiving and being a practitioner of care, one who practices care in the classroom. Care means to worry from the Greek and Latin, and it means to bear up from under, right? We can bear it up. That's how we care. We lift something.
Mhm.
So if we're going to be healthcare practitioners, that's what I'm called, a healthcare practitioner. I'm going to be a practitioner of the care in health. I need to be able to help people bear up from under whatever's happening. That's what care means. And that's medicinal. To me, a beautiful moon is medicinal. I look at the moon and my body secretes neurotransmitters that are healing. I receive oxytocin from my body. I receive serotonin from my body when I look at the moon. I cannot take a pill or a tonic that's called medicine unless I already have a receptor for that, unless my body can already make that. And then if my body's not making enough of it, I can take a pill, a piece of medicine that will amplify the response and the receptor that my body actually can make on its own. It just didn't for some reason. So back to your question about medicine. We have bastardized that word to the point that we're like, only a physician with a white coat and a stethoscope can give medicine. That is not correct. It is medicinal to smile at someone. So back to your question about narrative medicine, it was created in the medical community, but it is gifted to everyone so that we really start thinking about the medicinal health benefits of listening deeply to one another's story, whether it's in a book or it's in the person you meet, or whether I was just at Walmart. Now, I never go to Walmart, but my mother's 94. I just went to visit her, and I always stop at Walmart because they have chicken wings she likes. So I'm checking out, and the woman that checks me out, I saw that same woman 6 months ago. And the woman says to me, "Oh, are you here to see your mother again?" I was seen, I was heard, I was listened to by this beautiful woman. I would argue that's medicinal. So you go back into the classroom. I have teachers that loved me and they were medicine for me. My son had teachers who loved him and they were medicine. So the practice of narrative medicine is just about having the intention and the willingness
Yeah.
to sit with the discomfort, the emptiness, in behalf of authentically hearing the story of another. And if that's not medicinal, I don't know what is. But I don't need to have a degree in medicine to do that.
So I want to share a quick story as to what happened during my first year of teaching. This was after the Parkland tragedy had happened. And within the year, when I was teaching at that middle school where I had that non-negotiable to keep students alive, both physically and mentally, and I was allowing them to bleed their emotion and bleed their pain onto paper, the response that I constantly got from admin was, "We're not ready to hear what our students have to say."
Right,
It was never, "Oh, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll find ways
right,
to improve the circumstances for them." It was always, "Why are they telling you this? We're not ready to know what to
right.
do.
We're not ready to hear this.
What
I
do you
know.
expect
It's
us to do with
crazy.
this
That's
information?"
right. I would code that as I can't fix it, so please don't talk to me.
There you go. And I think about Elizabeth Dutro as well. Elizabeth Dutro has this article on writing as the speaking wound, as she calls it. And with the speaking wound or the talking wound, what she says is that when students are told to suppress and keep the banal, keep the sterile, they assume that everything that they want to share is important has to be hidden beneath that bandage. Yet at the
Right.
same time, we don't want to be pushing students to share, share, share as a way that perpetuates their pain and makes it feel like this performance for them. And I think what I've come to learn in my work in trauma studies is that schools recognize that. And instead of finding the balance, it's better to censor it and eliminate it completely rather than try and find an equilibrium. Dr. Adam Wolstorff says that trauma happens all the time out there. We live in a trauma society, yet we have such a hard time bringing it into the room for analysis, discussion, and something to make sense of. So then, why do classrooms feel that way? Or why do leadership teams or schools, why do schools feel that way, where trauma needs to be censored as an alternative to risking the mishandling of it?
Well, I think it goes back to what we said earlier that people are walking around traumatized
Mm-hmm,
and they can't take more trauma. I think they're afraid.
mm-hmm,
I think they're just children in a grown up skin bag
mm-hmm,
that are traumatized themselves and they're terrified that you're going to trigger their trauma. And
mm-hmm,
then what do we do? Right. And that's a crazy system, but it's the one we have. And if someone comes in and asks the person in the adult skin bag, pretending to be an adult when we're really all 4 around trauma.
Right.
That's dangerous. You become a dangerous person.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing we can do is to either do a complete transformation, fall on your knees and transform, or get rid of you. And most people in leadership positions, I've been in leadership positions, I've been around a lot of leaders. There are a lot of people in leadership positions who are working very hard to maintain their leadership position. And if something threatening to that comes along, they have the authority. They're the author, right? They're the author of the story. And they have the authority to write a story that says you don't fit in. You're writing a story, trying to author a story that we all need to fit. And in order for us to fit in as humans, our humanity, we need to also fit trauma and emotions, happy and sad. But that's a different story. And whoever has the pen, the author, gets to write the story.
Yeah.
And visionaries are the most dangerous. Anytime somebody takes over with a revolution, the first people, they get rid of the poets and the writers. They're gone, man. They're like gone, because they're the ones that will put things on paper in a way that is going to generate feelings, thoughts, and impulses that they want to suppress. And so what we talk about in narrative medicine, it's really courageous to listen.
I really think of Jonas, back to The Giver again, where Jonas was somebody who was literally holding the pen to the society.
Yeah.
And he was just a chaos causer because of that, and what he was trying to do with bringing in feelings and bringing in emotion and bringing in the messiness back into society. And I think that's why the elders chose to eliminate him if they could, because they just didn't want to deal with the presence of chaos that comes with emotions.
I think that's true. And I'm going to go back and read The Giver again. I haven't read it for many years, but I've read it a couple times when I was younger. It is one of those books that I think every time one reads it, they get a different message. I think in stories, we have reminders of chaos can be instructive if we let it be. I really love the book by Albert Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus. Are you familiar with that book?
I'm not. Tell me more about it.
That's the author that wrote The Plague. You probably are familiar with that story. But anyway, Albert Camus was a scholar of the absurd. He was an absurdist. He was a philosopher and a scholar of the absurdity. And he began to get interested in suicide.
Mm.
And he wrote and talked about, life is really absurd. It's just always throwing stuff at you. As you said earlier, it's just trauma everywhere, right? Like it's just every day, you cut your finger, stub your toe, wreck your car, a bomb falls out of the sky. Like there's trauma everywhere and every day. And so Camus says, let's just acknowledge that that's true. There's trauma every day. And these people he was talking to who were talking about suicide, he said, it kind of makes sense. Like that seems like a reasonable choice in a world that's full of trauma. It's absurd. But then he says, but what if you don't? And that was that profound question in his beautiful writing. But what if you don't? And then he goes into talking about Sisyphus, who pushes the boulder up the mountain every day, only to have it roll back down. And that's what life is like, right? Like you push that trauma boulder up the hill, it rolls right back down, and you have to do it all over again, like every day for all of eternity. The curse, the myth of Sisyphus. And Camus says at the very end of his book, after discussing this for, 150 pages, he says, life is absurd, and one must imagine Sisyphus happy. That was so profound for me. I'm like, first of all, what is he talking about, right? Like those great questions. And I realized if you have to push a boulder up a mountain every day for all of eternity, at some point you really could say, hey, on my way up the hill, there's a beautiful flower. Or, hey, I love the way the sun feels this time of year, and there's a maple tree over there, and now the leaves have fallen, and I'm pushing the boulder, right? And oh, now there's snow, and that's interesting. And like you could imagine Sisyphus could actually have found happiness in the toil, that the boulder became so secondary and almost irrelevant to the day to day. And to me, that's really what happened to me in writing for every day for a year and a day was every day was horrible, horrible. Something horrible would happen. Like you need to have the death certificates witnessed. That's a horrible thing to have to do. However, in that same horrible day, it was glorious and beautiful. Like when I literally had to go and get those stupid death papers witnessed, like in COVID, I got my mask on and I go to UPS, and everyone at my particular UPS in West Virginia were young, cool guys, probably all played in a band kind of people, right? Anyway, I go in that day. I have to get this paper witnessed. It was a hard thing to do. Walk up to the desk and I say to the guy, I've got this paper. I have to get it notarized. He puts his stamp on it. And then I said, and it has to be witnessed. And the guy turns and says to whoever's in the back that does the witnessing, can I get a witness? And I burst into song in UPS. Can I get a witness? And we're all dancing and singing. It was ridiculous. It was absurd, but it was wonderful. So here's this horrible. I mean, I can't even tell you how traumatic it was to carry those particular papers. And yet it became this wonderful thing. And that's the myth of Sisyphus. One must imagine Sisyphus happy.
Yes.
And that's what's in The Giver. And that's what's buried in these stories.
Mhm.
One must imagine Sisyphus happy. And to me, that's what I learned in sitting, I walked into this emptiness called the cosmic joker, the world, the fate, whatever you want to call it, took my fantastic husband off planet, back to the stars, no fair, no fair. Now I'm in this void, this emptiness. Okay, I'm learning about narrative medicine. I'm practicing narrative medicine. I'm trying to sit in the emptiness. What is here for me? What can I find here? I use the page to help me. I sat with Renee on my porch, Renee Nicholson, we just talked about.
Uh-huh.
What is here? What is here? And at the end of the year and a day, I realized, what's here? Nothing. But nothing is something, because nothing is emptiness. And into emptiness, I imagine it like a bowl. If you put a paper bowl into a fire pit, what happens is at first the fire goes around it, like holds it up, but then the fire goes in it, into the emptiness, and consumes the emptiness, the air, because the emptiness is something. Nothing is something. Having the willingness to sit in the emptiness, thank narrative medicine for teaching me that, was profound and powerful and a real gift for me. Was it healing? One could argue it was for me. I lived through the year and a day. And back to that classroom. If children could learn that, we're always filling kids up with stuff. Here's another handout, here's another worksheet. And so having a kid sit with nothing but a stick in the backyard was much better sometimes. Or having them sit with an Adirondack chair and say, I think I'll paint it, was much better than the handout that art teacher was giving online during COVID. Thankfully, she recognized that, right? So I think this whole idea of these leaders that can't tolerate that is because they've not taken the time to deal with their own grief or trauma, whatever it is. They're afraid of the emptiness because they're afraid of what will be in there. It's the whole being afraid to walk into the dark woods, right? That's in all of our literature. Something evil awaits beyond. But really, in the dark woods is a beautiful woods with a moon. Really. But we do have this story that we tell ourselves that there's evil in that darkness. But as you said earlier, the darkness comes on the page, they can bleed on the page, they can ultimately edit their page, edit their story, reflect on it, grow from it, maybe heal from it. That's really what's possible, but it's a risk, right? But if you have someone like you who says, bring it here, I can hold what comes out in the room. Then they bring it to the center of the room. I love that. Whatever they wrote, they then bring to the center of the room. You're basically saying, I have created a safe fire pit in the center of this room. Bring your empty bowl and let's observe what goes into it. And you can trust me to make it safe and I trust the process to make it healing. That's basically what you're saying.
Mhm.
Not everyone knows how to do that, but we have to try. And we have to
Mhm.
put more of us in the world who try.
And so that begs another question that I've been doing in my research, where I am not a therapist, and I know that I'm not trained to heal people, or I can witness their emotions, but I can't save them from it. I'm not a savior. And so for teachers that are in that practice as well, how can they also understand and maintain that boundary in a way that makes them feel safe as a course facilitator, that they can see students, they can witness them, but they're not responsible, nor are they in alignment or within the boundary to physically save them or rescue them because of their writing?
That's a great question. So let's pack to that. First of all, the word responsible is the ability to respond.
Mhm.
And I would argue that teachers are perhaps some of the best trained to with the capacity and the ability to respond. So that's important. None of us are a savior. It's not anyone's job to save anyone. And I think when we get into that mindset, that's fixer mind. We know that that's not very helpful. I don't like to be fixed. My guess is you don't
Right.
like to be fixed. So it's good that you can't do that. Those tools are not in your toolkit. That's great. And I think a teacher does have the ability to witness and respond. And if something does show up that needs more, like a Band-Aid, you send them to the nurse. If something shows up and the child needs more, send a referral through the IEP team. So a teacher is, in a lot of ways, the witness and a gatekeeper to additional services as needed. I think we have put perhaps too much on a teacher to expect them to be all things to all children, and that's nobody can be all things to anyone. But I do think a teacher is there to challenge a child to grow, and that's what I hear you talking about.
The metaphor that was given to me when I did a training in applied suicide intervention after losing a very dear friend to suicide just after the Parkland tragedy was that we can all be, as long as we are trained in the method of applied suicide intervention, we can be the gatekeepers in the classroom that keep students safe,
Right,
comma, for now, until that next trained professional in the building can come and intervene. It's like we can give the
right.
metaphorical emotional CPR until the next healthcare worker can come and help the student further.
That's right.
My
That's
error
right.
was that I thought my job was to keep my students safe, period. That I
Right.
was that final person. And when I learned that I was just the CPR person to metaphorically give emotional care until the next expert in the building could, that's where I felt like I was protecting my students better as well.
I love that. Well, isn't that true about all of life that we're really all, if we give ourselves permission, we're really all just that placeholder until someone better comes along,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Someone more experienced, older, better, wiser, whatever. But I don't think it's possible to always be the final one.
Right. Yes.
I'm hearing what you're saying and I'm stealing it for myself. And I'm saying to myself, I'm literally looking into my life right now of some places that I actually gave myself that job. And
Mhm.
I'm literally in this moment going into my mind and firing myself from the position because I'm woefully inadequate to be the final one. I release
Absolutely.
myself from that charge. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
What a
Yes.
silly job to have given myself.
Mhm. And I agree, knowing that there are others out there that are further along than we are that could be to our aid when helping and caring for others. I think that's what helps narrative medicine feel like that there is no line boundary when facilitating and using the practice as well.
Yeah, and some of those people are, I worked with children. So some of those people are, why they are so much better at it than me is because they don't have nonsense in their brains. They don't feel like they have the right answer. And so they show up and do dumb things. Like I had kids show up at my door when the many of the adults around me were trying to do, quote, the right thing in my grief experience and helping me. I had children show up at my door and bring me like a wilted dandelion they'd already blown the fuzz off. And that was so beautiful because it was from their heart,
Right.
right? And they're
Yeah.
like, or they bring me a picture of that dandelion and then they drew a picture of me standing with them and I'm the same size. I'm 5'8". I'm not the size of a child, but
Right.
their pictures of me has me be the same size of them.
Hmm.
And they're holding the dandelion and they're bringing me the dandelion and the picture they drew, which was completely, quote, wrong, but really it was the most beautiful correctness because to
Yeah.
them, they loved me and I was their little friend, even though
Right.
I'm not. Anyway, so my point being that sometimes the person that shows up isn't necessarily older, wiser, better trained. If we do allow ourselves to listen to the gifting of others, sometimes they're a child with a wilted dandelion.
So it sounds like that narrative medicine as an overall takeaway is the ability to not only express, but to also listen to your own expression and do the same for others. And like being your own witness.
Yeah, they talk about the word they use that I think goes exactly to what you are saying is intersubjectivity,
Hmm.
that you step into something, poem, literature, etc. And if you really listen to what's there, you're open to letting it come to you instead of having a preconception. So you step in, but you understand who you are is going to inform what you're reading. You're the lens. And so by definition, you're bringing something in. You bring something in, the artist has left something for you, something they intended. But because you stepped in with an openness, something magical, and it's a third thing that never existed before and may never exist again because of who you were and what you found in the emptiness, this third magical thing occurred, and that's yours alone for the rest of your life. And that's a beautiful thing. The intersubjectivity, the beautiful thing.
Thank you so much for that. And where can our listeners learn more about the work that you're doing?
Well, I have a website. It's all good websites of all good artists. It's under formation, but it's rondalynwhitney.com. And so that's a great place to learn more about what I'm doing. I have an author's page on Amazon. It's another place to see my work. And if the listeners are interested in my scholarly work, I'm on ResearchGate. So it's a
Oh,
pretty easy way to find my scholarly publications.
excellent. Thank you so much for that. One of the themes that I keep returning to throughout our conversation is this idea that healing doesn't always begin with answers. It often begins with the need to be heard. And your work is reminding us that stories are not simply reflections of our experiences. They are coming out of the ways that we survive them, the ways that we understand them, and eventually work to transform those moments. And I wanted to thank you for sharing your wisdom and your vulnerability and your perspective on narrative medicine with our listeners for today. And until next time, to our listeners, take care of yourselves and keep listening to your own story.
What a privilege to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.